So glad to see you all. It's some familiar faces, some new faces. For anyone that's new, my quick little rundown is my name is Doreen Graham. I'm a community educator volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. My mom had Alzheimer's for 5 years. I'm also a certified dementia practitioner, and I have my master's in gerontology. So this is our March series of topics which are different than what we did in February. So tonight's topic is dementia conversation, focusing on driving, which is obviously a big concern, going to the doctor concerns, if you need to bring something up with your loved one, having them come that you end up having some concerns, and then legal and financial planning. And my guess is that obviously a community like Glen Eyre, you've probably had somebody, legal, financial people coming in. The big part, it won't go into a lot of detail, is just trying to make sure that we have everything in order, which we all should probably do regardless, but in case there's any memory issues that come up. So these conversations, going to the doctor, deciding when they're necessary to stop driving, making legal and financial plans to cover your future. Today's program will provide tips on how to break the ice and have the most common difficult conversations. Part of that, too, has to be where the individual is at and kind of where the family member is at. Help you plan ahead and build a care team that communicates well. Give you the opportunity to hear from people who are dealing with similar issues and connect you with our helpful resources. So a lot of people can have different things, and denial, I'm fine, don't worry about me. That ends up being sometimes where the person living with Alzheimer's or starting to, and they can have that mild cognitive impairment diagnosis, that they're starting to have memory problems and they're like, oh, I'm fine, don't worry about me. Then it's always great because I was the sister. She lives close by and she can help. Have 2 brothers. They didn't help because A, I was the sister, and B, I didn't work outside the home, so I could take care of it. So yeah, we are just starting to notice changes. We're not sure there's even a problem. That goes back to a lot of our, 10 warning signs. I think if your gut's telling you something, not saying you have to run to the doctor, but make a note of it. It's hard. I think it's easier to deal with the disease when you can get on board with what's going on. It's very easy to push it away, to be in denial, that type of thing. But wait, if you're noticing changes, make a note. Put it in a journal. Put the note in whatever it is you need to do. And if you need to date it and see, if there's a pattern going on. You're busy with your own life, yes. When my mom died, I had an 8th grader and a kindergartner. That was hard. She's always been fiercely independent, and if I step in, she'll be offended. That's a tough one because you don't want to take away their sense of independence, depending on, too, the dynamics of the relationship that's happened. And sometimes people do get offended, but hopefully, as you go through the process, they'll know that you're doing it in a loving and caring way. And you also, too, need to be able to give them time to kind of process, and yourself time to process. So in order to have successful conversations, sooner is better than later. Don't wait for a crisis. Being in crisis mode is not fun. I had worked at a home care company, and when families call when there's a crisis, it's very hard to be able to get there. You almost, depending on the crisis, you're calling 911, or it ends up you've had the person's in the hospital or they've come out of rehab, and then you're like, now what are we supposed to do? So it can go back to, if you're noticing changes, some of that, plan ahead. Develop a plan for using finesse, which some, that's going to work, and for some, it's not going to work. And will all depend, too, on that family dynamics. Take notes about the changes you see. And I think that way, too, if you have things documented, you may be able to leave it with them. You will be able to maybe, your brother comes to visit or the son comes this time. If people are taking notes and there's more than one person noticing that, so that way, hopefully, if you've got more than one person noticing the changes, then hopefully that individual isn't going to fight it as much. But again, a lot, too, what's your family dynamics of what's going on? Practice in advance. Some of trying to role play in your mind, how can we do it? Part when they have in the conversations is you may have to do it in pieces. You can't necessarily come in and snowball them, because some people can handle it, some people can't. It might be plant the seed. It's also then with planning ahead that you're figuring things out. I would also try to do some research, look on our website, call the helpline, look into your doctors, get information. I always try to be proactive versus reactive to what the situation is, so you just have as much information as you can. And then talk when you are both relaxed and comfortable. You've got to be in the right place. You've got to be calm. You need to know if, this at 7:20 at night, I wouldn't have it, the conversation. If your, kids work, it probably would be a conversation to have on the weekends when everyone's probably better rested, more alert. Those type of things, because you don't want the time and place, and obviously don't go to a crowded restaurant. Don't do it in the middle of an activity that's going on here. That proper environment can help with what's going on, but also to allowing time for them to be able to pause if they need to. And again, you might do some on Saturday and come back and do some on Sunday, or do it one Saturday and do it the next Saturday. Conversations about going to the doctor, what could be a barrier. Obviously, there's fear of going to the doctor. I don't think any of us like to go because there's always a chance we're going to get a diagnosis, but I think on the positive is if you have a diagnosis, then you sort of know what's going on. Anger that they may not want to go or feel like you're forcing them to go. And then, the stigma that you're saying that there's potentially something that's wrong with me. And again, tying in that amygdala, that fight and fear and flight that may, approach them. Get the diagnosis, checkups, medical help with what they can do. And I mentioned, before too, I think if you're not comfortable with what they're telling you at that first appointment, I would go and get some additional information. If they say it's just aging, it's not aging. If you know and you look at, some of the warning signs and you're seeing, 3, 4 of these are going on and they're saying it's aging, you're like, Because nowadays doctors aren't spending enough time with individuals and to be able to see that you get a good diagnosis. Here's Donna talking about getting help.
I think you have to be honest. I think that's the important thing with it. To get a loved one to the doctor, I think you just need to be candid and honest of what are you trying to do. We're trying to understand what we're up against. It's just so important to do that, because you can't battle something that you don't know what you're battling. Again, it may not have been Alzheimer's, it could have been depression, it could have been so many other things. And guess what? There's other things you can do to take care of those issues as well. But that's what you need to be able to do. You can't ignore something. It's not going to go away.
And, tying in that, we talked about last week that sometimes if somebody has, a UTI, that could be potentially causing memory issues. If there was, change in medications, or if their blood pressure's out of control or diabetic, it's not necessarily saying memory changes. It's definitely Alzheimer's, but wouldn't it be better to kind of try to find out versus, she had a UTI, it's not. But again, make notes, journal, keep a calendar of what's going on. Tips to help the conversation of going to the doctor: use the words that are most comfortable for the person. Your loved one, what's going probably to be best, and then someone that as things are progressing, it may just be kind of short and to the point. Suggest Medicare's free annual wellness visit. I ended up with the Alzheimer's Federation of America. I did 2 weeks ago a memory screening, and I just ended up, I had registered. She called me. It was, not even 10 minutes, and she gave me, my score. She said, because I said, when should I have this done? She said, I would do it in 6 months or a year because of my family history. So I was like, you know what? I was also going to the gynecologist in February. I said, I'm going to do that every February. So when I get my mammogram, I go to the gynecologist, I'm going to get a memory screening. So be able to try to say, that we're going to do a wellness visit. If somebody is, sometimes I think men are a little more hesitant to go to the doctor than women may be, but see if you can get it in that way. We don't want to lie to our family, but sometimes we may have to be creative in how we're approaching, and let there be a reward of ice cream or something, after we can go to lunch or the bookstore or something, so it's, and as enjoyable as that visit can be. There you go. So that's... Invite family to communicate concerns and questions to the doctor. You may need to decide who's going so that it's not, the whole, it's great if you got 6 kids and everybody's involved, but maybe there's a spokesperson that can go per se so that your loved one's not feeling so overwhelmed. But the big part is that whoever is going, make sure that the other members of the family are able to get their concerns across, and there can be a list so that the loved one doesn't feel like they're being cornered against or being ganged up on. If still reluctant, try using a therapeutic fib, which So, I hate to say it, but as the disease can progress and they may forget, I think you, at least from my experience, you run into more issues when things are first going on. We were kind of lucky that we didn't get a lot of, my mom didn't, put up red flags and stuff. It was you were driving on the wrong side of the highway or going the wrong way, and we're finding out what's going on. So we kind of took over the conversation and brought her along for the ride. Conversations about when to stop driving. Have you noticed that they're having accidents, traffic tickets, scrapes on the car, mistakes while driving? I think the other big concern is the world we're living in now. It seems like nobody stops at a stop sign. And I tell my 16-year-old who has a permit, I'm like, you cannot assume anything of anybody driving. And so for somebody who's been driving a really long time, that doesn't mean that that person's going to stop because everybody's in such a hurry. So it's just, try to, maybe it's that fiblet of trying to figure out a way, or maybe the car needs to go get worked on to get the oil change, and Lord, it's taken 3 months to get that oil change. There's a backlog in oil. It's on who knows how creative you have to be or something to get that. Chris's family needs to ask his father to stop driving.
There's no exact answer on this is when you stop driving. You can tell when coming up to an intersection, as an example, the ability to understand what's going on around you was starting to deteriorate a little bit. Being on the highway with cars on both sides becomes a little bit more difficult. And first and foremost, the safety of everybody in the car as well as other drivers on the road. You think about that, and you want to make sure you're not putting anybody in danger. But then the difficult part is telling your dad, who you love, and he loves driving, and he's used to it, and he can no longer do that. But then even then, taking the keys away full time was very difficult. The doctor was very helpful in just saying, medically, you can't do this anymore. But my mother had the hardest time with this because she knew how much this was going to hurt him as well. And this is one of the first things that we had to deal with as a family when it came to telling my dad that he had to stop doing something because of this disease. That meant a lot to him.
And I think, whether you have the disease or not, a lot of people, the idea of stop driving, is something that's very hard. He made the point is, God forbid, we don't want something to happen to anybody in the car or for somebody else. And what I would do is, if you're running into, again, I keep talking about our helpline, if you're having that conversation and you're running into roadblocks, call the helpline, ask for information on the website. If you talk about driving, there's different types of suggestions, and see if some of that, they may come up with something that you haven't, thought about, or a way how do we approach this? Tips to help the conversation to stop driving. Plan ahead before an accident occurs. Because I think we all know if, God forbid, an accident happens, nobody's going to be patient, and we don't need to be screaming and going and, I told you, that kind of thing. So we want to try to deal with it before we know, God forbid, it becomes an issue. Express your concerns about specific changes that you're noticing. Appeal to the person's sense of responsibility and concern for others. And that might be you're almost feeling like you're guilting them into, you know what, Dad, we really can't afford anything to happen to you, but we really can't afford for you something to happen to somebody else. And that's the conversation I had to have with my mother-in-law. I can't afford for you, God forbid, to kill somebody, Grandma. And she didn't drive anymore.
Some tips on having the conversation is pointing out, especially for my father, the potential danger to others that it may cause if he's behind the wheel. And, just talking about it from the standpoint that this is not only the best thing for you, but this is also the best thing for others around you. And these are some of the alternatives, making sure that, this is what's going to happen, having a plan. If Mom can't take you, then Uncle Thomas or will be here to take you, and we will make sure that you're getting out of the house and that you're doing some things. So, presenting the bad news, but then also presenting the plan. And for my father, that's really, really important to have a plan.
And I think for you all living here, obviously you've got the bus that works, and then obviously Go Carry. The bus service itself works with taking individuals, to appointments. So there's other alternatives, and it may be that we figure out, okay, he's got a doctor's appointment coming up. I'm not sure how it is how you call down to get on the bus list or something, or reach out to Go Carry with getting that. Almost you could make that alternative plan so that when you're having that conversation and he's like, well, I have to go to the doctor. Yes, you do, Dad, but we've come up with this plan. Let's try it for this one. And it may end up being that he goes on the bus here or he goes through GoCarry.com, and it ends up, it's almost like a relief to him that worry, because think about driving, there's a worry, there's a concern. And if we can take that away from them, not just because we need it, but if we can take that away from them, it may make that conversation of getting the keys away from them permanently a lot easier. Alternative plans, okay. Incorporate the voice of esteemed professionals and have empathy. And there is the Duke Driving School that will go and do a series. It's with OTs that is like the reaction time, so they can be tested if you can convince your loved one to take part in that. Check with your doctor to see, especially like if you're seeing a neurologist, if they have any suggestions. Maybe the keys can somehow go out in the trash can for the week one day or something. It went out with the recycling or anything like that.
Talking to somebody about stopping driving, I think it's most important to understand that that is tied to someone's independence more than most things. And so by saying you can't do this anymore is like telling the person, it's like ripping away their independence. And that doesn't feel good for anybody. I know that I've always tried to put myself in that situation. What would I think if someone was saying this to me? You don't get to do this anymore. And how would I feel? And how would I want somebody to talk to me about this? And so if you try to I think sometimes too many people try to approach it as, very punitive. And I'm doing what's right for you. So why don't you understand? Without really turning the tables and putting themselves in that position, understanding, how helpless that feels to take those things away. It's important to be thoughtful about what that experience is like for the individual.
I think that too ties into someone we were talking about last week with the conversations of trying to meet them where they are and understand and say, and recognize and acknowledge the concern of them losing that independence. But hopefully, they will be willing to hear your side of the story with it versus, like she said, the punitive, that if you're just, I'm doing this for your best interest, that I think it gets into almost like treating them like a child, which is not what we want for anyone. When to stop driving? Well, to maximize independence, options, choices, planning. Oh, where's this? Here we go. Financial costs.
Financially, this disease will increase the cost of living. It's just a fact. So planning for those extra costs is that much more important than what you were planning for before. And so you have to review everything that's in place, see what changes need to be made, both legally and financially, and you have to monitor that going forward afterwards too.
Conversations about legal and financial planning. If somebody's reluctant, it's an uncomfortable conversation. Somebody can feel intrusive, disrespectful. If you have to talk about it, trying to do it, again, the plan ahead versus being in that crisis mode. We are living longer, and depending on what, someone's financial situation is, are they able to stay in the home? Are they able to stay in the community? Do they need to go to memory care? Do they need home care? And trying to get an idea about that. There's an attorney's office, I believe it's Cary Estate Planning here, that actually has an Alzheimer's center. That they've brought somebody on board. The woman who started the firm, I think both, she had a grandmother and a grandfather that had Alzheimer's, and trying to look to see, to make sure that it's like that you have all the documents that you need to have before, because the biggest thing is making sure that we're able to tell our loved ones what our wishes are before memory starts to become a problem.
Here's what I've come to after all of this. That it's the most loving and kind thing you can do for them is to be honest with them and say, this is like a really scary thing. And I feel a lot of discomfort bringing this up to you. But I tell them, if you're going to be the one who's going to take them on this journey, then you have to tell them, I'm going to be here on this journey with you. And there are things that we have to do to get this in place. We're going to go on this journey together. I've told you I'm going to be here with you till the end. So let's get this ready. It's like we're going to go on an ocean ship. We've got to get things packed up. We've got to figure out what we're taking with us. We got to get ready. And the things that we have to get ready, we have to make sure that we know which doctors you're going to be using. I need to get this signed, okay? So that if you go in there and they have to do surgery, for example, I got to have this durable power of attorney for health care for you. I have to have this worked out, okay? Now, if for some reason, okay, you need to go to rehab after something, I have to have these documents here, the financial stuff, so I can get these things taken care of for you while this is going on. I don't want to have anything get in the way of us being able to progress and keep doing this. I said, it seems hard because it's hard in our heads, Everybody's read about people who've stolen from elderly people, who've done these horrible things. But if you're the person who's approaching this with loving kindness and compassion, and you're willing to take this person on this journey, you're not doing a bad thing. You're doing the right thing by talking to them about it. And you approach it from the standpoint of, I'm here for you. I'm doing this for you. We're going to do this together. And I'm going to help you through this. And these are the tools that I need to make sure that we can do this.
And obviously, as the disease is going to progress, you want to make sure that you have things in place so that you understand what their wishes are when they're cognitively able to tell you. Tips to help with this conversation: begin by explaining that you are in this together. And it may be in some situations that you may need to bring in one of the adult children. I ended up being put on my parents bank account, just in case something, God forbid, happened to my dad before my mom, because there was no way my mom was going to be able to handle it. So you may want to, again, depending on your family dynamics, bring in an adult child so they are aware of what's going on. Start by asking questions and gathering documents. Nowadays, there's so much information on the internet, and I'm sure Allison can get somebody to come in. And when I was here in January for the health fair, I know there was a gentleman that was here that, does financial stuff, that someone would be able to come in and talk to the community if some people don't have some things in place. Explain that these are standard plans that need to be made as we get older. And we need to do that regardless if someone's going to have Alzheimer's or not. I was widowed when I was 31. My husband was 35. We didn't have a will. And then I was actually pregnant, and then it was in Georgia. So I had to have a guardian appointed to my unborn child to say it was in his best interest to sell my house. But, we were 30, 31, 35. We weren't getting a will. I mean, so regardless of what the situation is, we need to have these things in place. And it just clearly, as somebody's memory becomes an issue, then it's going to be harder to make some of these conversations. Break the conversation into parts and try different times and locations. Hopefully, if it ends up that if it was the dad who has been the financial person and he's the one who's starting to have the memory, depending on whether, mom is able to have the conversation, it may take one of the children kind of leading that conversation if, and it may be that it's too overwhelming for, if it's your dad who has it, your mom, you just got to see how things were going. Again, for my family, I being the girl and I took care of things. But I also, too, when my first husband was an only child, so when my father-in-law died, I had gotten all the financial information for my mother-in-law when my mom got sick, and I'm glad we did because there were accounts that my mother-in-law didn't even know about. And fortunately, my father-in-law, we sat down one day and had the conversation, which I was not sure he would have because he was a very proud man, but he did and knew it was in Patsy's best interest and Patrick, my son's best interest, to get all this taken care of. So they're not fun conversations to have, but we all need to have them regardless of whether or not somebody's going to have a cognitive issue. And involve others as needed. Obviously, there's help out there. If you need to, if you don't want to involve somebody, you can do a will online and, all of those type of things. The care team, your family, you have your medical team. Peers, if you're able to have anybody that can come in and help or somebody that you can relate to. Allison has been in contact with Madison, the program manager at the Alzheimer's Association here in the Raleigh office, to try to see if we can get a support group started for some here at Glen Eyre that are dealing with that. So that can be, some support with peers, workplace. I'm guessing most of y'all are retired, so we may not be having to worry about the workplace. And then community resources. Anything that's out there, through churches, through the Alzheimer's Association, the Dementia Alliance of North Carolina, the information on Tip of Snow, the Duke Family Dementia Support. We're in a good area where they're doing a lot of research and they've got a lot of information for what versus if we were a rural area. So we get to contacting us. Again, our different things. We have the Navigator, the Community Resource Finder that would have information, the ALZ Connected if you wanted to connect with other individuals, the Caregiver Center. If you go on the alz.org and you put in caregiver, there are so many resources, and it starts to then break down to like what some of the specifics. I had gone on and was trying to look at some of the financial and legal. It was going to end up being like 15 pages a person. I was like, I can't print all that. So it just, because there was so much not knowing what people's situations are, who's done what or whatever. So if you go on our website, there's tons. Obviously, the helpline, if there's questions, support groups, again, trying to get one started, education programs. And that's why, when I mentioned the flyer for what's going on in the webinars, that's something, and what I can do in the future is forward that to Allison, and she could get it printed or let you all know for any webinars each month coming up, that there's some, because it's information in some of the webinars, they're interactive where you're able then, to ask questions and on whatever that specific topic is, and you'll be able to get more information. I mentioned last time, this presentation is basically online if somebody wants to, go back through it. I don't feel like this was as complicated one per se, because my hope is that a lot of you all have gotten your financial stuff together. The doctor, we can remember, no one can provide all of the support alone. Form a care team and talk with family about concerns as they arise. Talk about it. And there was a quote from, I put it in my purse, I want to say it was Thomas Edison, something about having to do, when we were talking last time about behaviors and redoing things and trying to figure out what worked and it talked about just doing things different ways to be able to reach your goal. And I thought, okay, if somebody like Thomas Edison is saying, you got to try again, I'm like, okay, then I must be doing something right. Oh, I guess, any questions?